All right, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another fantastic edition of Wisconsin Veterans Museum's Book Talk. I would like to just say welcome to everybody who's joining us today. And of course, today is November 11th, so happy Veterans Day to all of our veterans out there, whether you're past or present. Your service and sacrifice is always appreciated. So happy Veterans Day to all of our veterans out there. We still have a couple people that are connecting via audio, so we'll give them a second, but I'll go ahead and make my opening remarks while that is happening. So like I said, welcome to our another edition of our book talk series. This is not our last one of the year, so please don't consider this your last time seeing us for 2024. We do have another one coming up, and I'll talk about that at the end of the program. I would like to say welcome, or not welcome, thank you to the Wisconsin Veterans Museum Foundation for their continued support and all of our free virtual programming that we get to put on, not only our book talks, our movie night discussions that we have, our trivia nights. So thank you to the Wisconsin Veterans Museum Foundation for their support. And then, of course, support for the foundation coming in the memory of Pat Finley. So thank you to the Finley family as well. For those of you that are out there joining us today, I do have all of our security features enabled. You will not be able to start any video or unmute yourselves, but we are definitely taking questions for our author today. If you have any questions, please put that in the chat function. You can address that straight to me. I'll be taking all the questions that we get during the program. I'll be formatting a PowerPoint, and we'll bring that up at the end so everybody can see the questions as the author is answering those. And of course, our author today is Mr. Mark Faultersack. Mark, welcome. Mr. Mark Faultersack is the editor and publisher of his father's book, My Book from You from the Greenland Patrol. He has a bachelor's degree in theater from the University of Wisconsin. And he is a retired utility manager and energy consultant, and he's written several articles for publications in that field. He's a big fan of World War II history, particularly Coast Guard history, and we'll see why, certainly. And especially World War II Coast Guard history around the Greenland area. His father served in the Coast Guard from 1942 to 1945, and Mark has preserved many photos, sketches, and artifacts from that time, while his father was stationed on the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Sea Cloud and the Evergreen. And he also has the original 150-foot long sonar paper that his father wrote all of his works on. And Mark's going to talk about that for sure. And remember, if you have any questions for the author, please put those in the chat function and send that directly to me. I will be populating a PowerPoint with all the questions that we get during the presentation. And on that note, Mark, I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to turn the floor over to you. Welcome today, sir, and we look forward to hearing about your father's journal.
Thank you, Eric, and happy Veterans Day to you and everyone out there. And I was just talking with Eric before we came on and thanking him for his service. And so I think how appropriate this talk is for today. And when I think about this whole topic that I'm going to mention today and talk to you about, I am so grateful for all the contributions. I think we all are or should be, the contributions of people in our military over the years. I'm going to talk today about my father, who I had the privilege, my wife and I had the privilege of taking care of the last year of his life in 2002. He stayed with us here in Middleton. And I always knew it existed, this account that I'm going to talk about, but I had never seen it until after my father passed away. He never shared it with me directly, but there had been talk in the family about this letter or this account, this war journal. And so, it's with gratitude today that I think back to the World War II era where this took place and where this originated from. And you've all probably heard of the generation that served in World War II kind of being referred to as the greatest generation. And in a lot of ways, I believe we stand on their shoulders. They sacrificed, we owe them a lot. They sacrificed, they put their lives on hold for 3 to 5 years, a lot of them. And they helped save the world from Hitler and a lot of other nasty stuff. And we need to keep that history alive. So this account that I found, it was in my father's materials, and he saved a lot of things, and I'll show you pictures of this. And as a matter of fact, I get my next slide up. Well, that's not nice. Let me try that again. Eric, I seem to be having trouble with the
Yeah,
PowerPoint.
and
Maybe you can
we
advise.
just went through all this. Everything was working fantastically.
Yeah, it was.
Maybe
And
Mark, if you
I'm
just go ahead and leave it on this screen right here and just go ahead and go to your individual slides. For some reason, it's not
yeah.
liking the
Uh,
slideshow function.
Here I go.
There you
I
are.
just
All
figured
right.
it out. Yeah, I don't know. I think it was on hold too long. Okay, so this is going to call it. It's a roll of sonar paper from the ship that my father served on in 1944 with the Coast Guard, and it was a a discarded roll of sonar paper. My father entered the Coast Guard and of World War II, right after Pearl Harbor. My parents were just starting to date. As a matter of fact, they learned of Pearl Harbor attack one Sunday night, and in 1941 they came out of up in Merrill, Wisconsin, where they both lived. They came out of a movie theater, and it was snowing, and they just heard about the attack. So, like many young men at that time, they weren't looking for ways to get out of the service. They were looking for ways to get into it. And my father had difficulty because when he went to join the army, they rejected him because he had a heart murmur, and he had it since he was a young child. And I don't even know if he knew about that until that point. But so he tried to get into the Navy. Same thing, could not get in. It took a while, but eventually he did get into the Coast Guard. I'm not sure whether that was because they looked the other way or they just missed the heart murmur on the physical, but he was able to get in. And after a few years of being in there, my parents ended up getting married, but I'm getting ahead of myself for this particular thing. Um, he entered service in 1942 rather, and went into the Coast Guard, served aboard a ship. And this is this scroll, this roll of paper, and with its original container that you see here is in my possession and plan to donate it to the Coast Guard Museum out in New London, Connecticut. They're building actually a new museum. So this is very thick paper, and it's 150 feet long. Normally, this is actually the second ship that my father served on. And though he normally was out for 1 month at a time, and they harbored out of Boston. And this is where my mother, once they were married, eventually met him out there, and they got an apartment together, a brownstone apartment out there, and he would come back after a month and have a few days with her, and then have to go right back out on another month-long tour of duty out on the North Atlantic up by Greenland. And so there was an attempt to, there was obviously communication, and the Coast Guard was very good as well as the other armed services in allowing letters to go back and forth between sailors and their wives or their girlfriends, and so that happened fairly regularly and fairly quickly. The mail service was quite good actually, but those were censored. And I've been told that they actually back then they censored, meaning that if there was any information in the letter that would give away, if it fell into wrong hands, would give away a secret, military secret to America's enemies. So literally, the loose lips sink ships phrase kind of applied here. So my father wanted to, in addition to the letters that he was writing back and forth with his new bride, my mother, he wanted to write an account and give it to her. He did not understand that he was not going to be out for 1 month, and not for 6 months, but actually for 9 months, and without coming home at all. Part of the reason for that was the war was getting more intense, and also one or more of the ships that were their relief ship were sunk. And so they were out there, and they were spending a lot of time up in the North Atlantic by Greenland. There were bases up in Greenland that they serviced. The ship that he was on, he was actually the radio man. So he performed communications, and Morse code was the mode. And so he was up on the top part of the ship, and that was near the captain's quarters and near the helm of the ship. And so he would be receiving actually the messages, radio messages, even before they came to the captain. He'd be decoding them. So so this he started writing this scroll, this roll of paper, and it's kind of half war journal, what's going on with their particular ship, the ocean, the weather, German submarines trying to sink anything in sight. All these things were going on, and so it was when I looked at and first read this account, and it's written in cursive writing, the secret language of our generation, right? The younger generation maybe don't hard for them to read, but it's amazingly legible, and I do not know to this day how he wrote it so well, and I can pull it out right now and show it to you, and it looks like he wrote it yesterday. It was very well preserved. And so that was really, really nice. Actually, I'll talk about a little bit later how I transcribed it all and made it into a book. But the decision to make it into a book did not happen right away. We just were enjoying it for the heritage, for our family history, read it to our sons, and talked to a few other people about it. And it was about the fifth time, I would say, when I the fifth time I read through it, that I realized that some of those old photos that I remember seeing of my dad's military service when I was a child, it was in a drawer, and we had them because I went through all my father's stuff. So I had these photos. I realized that these photos were correlating with a lot of what he was talking about. And so I pulled them out. I realized that a number of times these pictures were talking exactly about what he was talking about here. He didn't own a camera, believe it or not. He did know a fellow who did own a camera on a board ship, and this ship was the USS Evergreen. This is, by the way, a picture, a drawing, a sketch of my father. You can see in the lower right-hand corner, Eleanor Rosner drew the sketch August 26, 1942. In the Buddies Club, the kind of the precursor to the USO, and it was in Boston. So she sketched this, and he was, I think, at that point early in the war, waiting for deployment. This is just my dad's identification card and dog tags, which he also saved. He saved a lot of things. This is the ship that he was aboard. So the upper part of the ship was where he was at, I believe, and you'll see from some of the other photos. But anyway, I realized that a number of the photos that we had all those years corresponded to what he was writing about. And so as I put this book together, I actually incorporated, there's almost, I believe, close to 60 pictures in this book. And so I'm only going to show you probably a little over a dozen of them today. So the North Atlantic was no calm place to be. as you can see from this picture. And so there was a lot of commotion regarding a number of things that were dangers. But he talked about everyday life, and I'm going to read some excerpts in a little bit here. But I just wanted to get into uh, how the some of the themes that are encountered in reading this book, in this journal. So a couple things, and I'll read it in a little bit. But one of the things that the account starts out with in 1944, they get out and they're doing weather reporting in the North Atlantic, and my father's the radio man, right? He's not connected with anything medical, but there's a fellow who ends up having an appendicitis attack. They're pitching and rolling on the Atlantic Ocean, and there's a doctor aboard, but not much else. And for obvious reasons, you don't want to be a sitting duck out there, but to operate while the ship is rolling, pretty tough. So in a few moments here, I'll read a section of that, and it's right. That's how the book starts. That's how the account starts. Other things that are mentioned that I'll just give you some teasers on, and that is things that happened and are mentioned and discussed in the account. I didn't know this, but most ships, probably all military ships, have a pitch or a roll meter or basically a bubble, a glass, a level that shows the degree of pitch. So if 0 degrees is the mast is straight up and you're calm in the water, as you pitch and roll back and forth sideways, that mast goes sideways, and that meter can actually measure how much you're tipping. And so it's crazy, but at one point he describes, with the captain present, they rolled 47 degrees. And so that's like this. Can you imagine trying to sit, sleep, or eat? And he describes how that things were quite impossible. He also talks about prisoners. They actually transported German prisoners aboard ship and sleeping right, in the same quarters. This is a picture of my father during one of the leaves that he had in Boston. And this is my mother, also during that time. And also contained in this, as a rather large appendix to this book, I included the contents of a number of letters that were also saved. So these are letters that, as you can see from the postmark here on this one, begin while they're still dating, October of 1941. So this is right before Pearl Harbor. And these letters, the only letters we have are the ones that my mother wrote to my father in his various locations up in Merrill, from Merrill rather, to where he was trying to get into the service down by Chicago, then out on the East Coast training once he's in the Coast Guard, and then they eventually get married. And so those letters stop because they are together more. And although there are some letters, and there's a few letters at the very end also that are once the war is at an end, but they're still both stationed out on Nantucket Island. More about that later. So also other things that are mentioned in this account, torpedoes. There's actually an account which I'll read that was quite a close call. There are there's a lot of discussion about the weather and blizzards. My father mentioned to me once, I don't think it's in the account, but he mentioned to me once that people usually think of hurricanes when they come up the east coast of the United States and they kind of go north. Everybody thinks they disappear. He told me they don't disappear. And there's an account of a hurricane turned into a kind of a winter blizzard up close to Greenland. with the wind speed of 115 miles per hour, they clocked it as. And he said the snow was literally flying sideways. That's another thing that they had to watch out for, and was icing up of the ship, the part that's above the water. And that could happen even with salt water if it's cold enough. And if it builds up too much, they would have to go up, climb up, and knock the ice off. Which there were sister ships that were lost because of that problem. So it was a very real danger. There's discussion about finding subs, German submarines that were nearby and underwater, and they would launch depth charges to try to take them out before they got torpedoed themselves. And so there's discussion and pictures regarding that. There's also an account where they actually they're up near Greenland, and they're along the eastern coast of Greenland. There was a little bit of a cat and mouse game that got played with the German Nazi weather shacks the Germans would go in, and they would drop off two people. They'd build a shack, and they'd have radio equipment, and they would radio the weather conditions from Greenland back to Germany, because everyone needed to know what the weather was going to be like coming their way, and it all came from around Greenland in the North Atlantic. So that was very important to make decisions. And so both sides were one of the purposes for being in Greenland was to have a weather prediction. As a matter of fact, I believe the go ahead for D-Day in Normandy, the last weather account was from that group of ships. And by the way, the operation, overall name for the operation up there, with the bases in Greenland and all the activity around there, and weather reports, and also airstrips for that. That was all called Greenland Patrol. So that was what was going on there. So there were in eastern, especially in eastern side of Greenland, there'd be this cat and mouse game going on where the Germans would drop off in these many uncharted fjords. They'd drop off two guys and a shack and a radio, and they would radio the weather. Well, so the United States and the Allies would also have weather reports, but they were trying to get rid of the Germans all along there. And so this happened, and they would capture people, and they would have prisoners. And so sometimes the prisoners would literally be transferred to their ship, and they would have to guard them. And can you imagine just sleeping in your bunk, and there are numerous prisoners not far away, and there's one guy guarding them with a machine gun. So this made for exciting times. They would go into some of these uncharted fjords, by the way, and because they were uncharted, sometimes they would actually run aground, and they would get stuck. Sometimes they actually damaged the bottom of the boat. And so because of that, I know in one time he actually in his account, they have been damaged the bottom of their boat, and they have to repair it. Well, how are you going to do that when you're breaking through ice and you're up in the middle of nowhere? They'd actually he describes how they actually went into a fjord where there was ice. They stopped. They took a cable from the top of their ship, and they'd run it out on the ice, break a hole in the ice, anchor that cable, and pull in and use a winch, and just pull the ship over sideways, so that the part of the ship that was damaged was out of the water. And then they'd lower guys down, and they would repair that, and they'd go on. So that would happen. There's accounts also in this time where they would be towing another ship because the ship was having troubles, and so they would be doing this, and sometimes it was in the middle of a big storm. One time it was described, and they got separated. The one that was basically dead in the water, the hawser, the large rope that was towing between the two ships, got wrapped around my father's ship's propeller, and they were dead in the water as well. And so and they had radio silence because they didn't want to be located by by Germans being able to trace them to their location and sink them. So all of these things were just amazing things. Other things that were discussed and mentioned, and you can read about in the book, had to be more with my parents' new relationship. They were newly married. Obviously, there was a lot of longing being out that long apart from each other. There was discussions about their friendship and their relationship, obviously, and there's a lot of other themes I would mention, themes of faith and forgiveness and humility and even humor during all these accounts. Only a couple times in the account, the original account with the cursive writing, was the writing kind of shaky, and that was usually when they were breaking ice for another ship. That was one of their duties. Up on the southern tip, toward the southern tip of Greenland. There was a base there, still is an airstrip up there on southern Greenland called Narsarsuaq, and a number of bases up along the eastern and western side of Greenland. So I'm going to show you this picture. It's kind of blurry, probably for a number of reasons. This is actually the radio shack on board ship, I believe, and my father's in the foreground here, and it's a little blurry because of the pitching and rolling of the ship. But this is the kind of equipment. They would get the Morse code signals. They would interpret them, type them up, and give them to the captain. One of the letters that came from home in the early days, this was a sketch that my aunt made of my mother, and she sent to my father in one of the letters. And again, all the letters are in a rather large appendix at the end of the book. The letter, the scroll in my father's account accounts for probably about 3/5 of the book. And then we have pictures, and then we have the letters from home starting earlier in the war as kind of a reference point and the beginning of their relationship. And also there was two short autobiographies written long after the war, written by my father to kind of give context to all of this. And I'm going to read a few excerpts from that. Another picture of my mother during one of the breaks in Boston, I believe this was. This is a picture, as best I can understand, is from probably the top part of the ship, looking over a railing that you see in the foreground here, and toward the front of the ship. And you can see the crashing of the waves that were going on, and things could be quite rough. And so those are my father borrowed a camera. Guy he knew aboard ship had a camera but didn't have film, and he said, "I'll buy all the film if you let me use the camera." So all these pictures that we're seeing are from that, and again, a lot of them are quite good detail, I would say. This is that picture of where their ship, he's looking backward off their ship toward the ship that they're towing, and they're pulling them through ice. There's an account in this journal that talks about how they towed this ship all the way to Iceland and had to actually head leave and went in Reykjavik, Iceland, and talked with people there, and I have some pictures in the book. I don't have any here of Iceland, but that gives you an idea of some of the conditions. Here's a picture of, I believe, all these men that you're looking at here. He's taking a picture down from, again, up above. These are all German prisoners. And most of them were quite, once they found out they weren't going to be tortured or killed or anything like that, were quite grateful. They were probably, most of them, pretty happy to be getting good meals, and the war for them was over. Some of the officers that were captured were more belligerent, my father said. And also, while they were up in Greenland, they did have contact with the Inuit people. Back then, of course, they didn't call them Inuit; they called them Eskimos. My father, as you read the description of them, and they would do trading and stuff. Here, they're out in their igloos next to the ship, and they would do trading. They would trade all sorts of things, including a model of one of their igloos, handmade by the Inuit, which I have in my dining room. And so typically back then, though my father didn't smoke, the currency wasn't dollars or anything. It was actually packs of cigarettes. So go figure. You actually can see the one gentleman in the boat closest to you in the picture here. He's smoking a pipe. So that happened. So in the account, they actually, my father refers to them as Skimos, short for Eskimos. I don't think there was any derogatory intent there at all, from what I can tell, but that's just a nickname that they had for them. There were icebergs and mountains up that they came very close to. And so there are some pictures there. This is just one of them. Enjoyed just seeing the huge nature of some of these that they came next to, and they had to watch out for it. Those are all the pictures that I have. I want to read you a couple excerpts, and then we can go to questions. So I mentioned before, the book starts off with a description of what happens out just a couple days in this 9-month tour of duty. So this is from the first chapter of the book. No sooner are we on station than a boatswain's mate gets a bad attack of appendicitis, and we radio NMH to send a seaplane out to take him ashore. They tell us there is no available plane, so the doctor tells the skipper the man has to have an operation, and fast. So the old man heads for the closest port, Bermuda, which is 2 days away. So here they're not up to Greenland yet. They're just coming out of Boston and doing a little weather reporting in the North Atlantic. Bermuda, which is 2 days away. When we were still about 12 hours away, he was in such pain that the doc was afraid it would bust. So we stopped the ship right in the middle of the ocean in broad daylight, and the doctor operated on him. I cut and folded bandages and watched the entire operation. It was a hard job for the doctor because the fellow was fat, and especially on his stomach. We have a chief pharmacist mate, but we knew nothing about operations. But he knew nothing about operations, so the doc had no help on his own but his own knowledge. He's a good doc, though, a Lieutenant JG, and has plenty of experience. At one time, when his appendix was out and the doc was just beginning to sew the inner lining up, the patient stopped breathing. Claire, you can't realize what a feeling goes through you when you see a man stop breathing and his lips and face turn dull, dead-looking blue, and you are helpless to do anything. The doc told the pharmacist mate to get some kind of hypo and give it to him. He ran around like a chicken with his head cut off and finally found it and gave it to the patient. Meanwhile, the doc was working desperately to make him start breathing by giving him artificial respiration. I suppose I could stop here and tell you you got to get the book, but I'll finish the paragraph. Even the doc shook his head once as if it seemed hopeless, but pretty soon he began to gasp and color came back to his lips and face. Whereas in a hospital, it took Dr. Jenkins only 35 minutes to take my appendix out, it took our doc here aboard ship nearly 2 hours, but he was handicapped in many ways. So that's that. I want to read just as again a kind of a sampler from the large appendix, which is different kind of appendix of the book, where I've included all the letters that my father saved from my mother. So this is from my mother to my father, and this is going back in time. This is December 22nd, 1941. Some of you will recall that 2 weeks earlier from that, December 7th, was Pearl Harbor Day. So this is 2 weeks after that. She's writing from the Windy Hill Farm, Merrill, Wisconsin. I finished my Yule logs and sent them off. They were truly beautiful. I saved the very biggest for our home after all. The radio just blared forth the news of another shock, a sinking of a freighter 5 miles off the coast of San Francisco by a Japanese submarine. Surely this war is part of a plan of our Creator and probably will clear the way for some great good, but it is hard to see clearly at times, isn't it? So that's the end of that excerpt. And then a couple other excerpts from the two short autobiographies, again at the end of this book. This is from Howard, my father, to Claire. And he's describing looking back on his life on a couple things. Claire and I did much serious talking about getting engaged, but decided to wait until the war was over. When I got back to Boston, Massachusetts, I got Claire an engagement ring. The war turned more and more intense as time went on. In 1943, we were assigned to far North Atlantic duty. The seas raged almost constantly in the North Atlantic, a very dangerous duty compared to the calm seas in the South Atlantic. We were pulled off the weather station again for convoy duty. Thousands of merchant ships were convoyed to Murmansk, Russia, to supply Russia, or it would have been taken by the Germans. It is extremely far north, 70 degrees north latitude. The North Atlantic was so filled with German subs that despite the convoy, ships were sunk at will. The water was so cold that those thrown into the seas or jumped were lost almost immediately. It was only the vast number of merchant ships that made it possible to get war material through to Murmansk. Merchant ships were sunk by the hundreds. Terrible, terrible. I might add here, I late in life, while I was spending some time with my dad, waiting for my mother to come out of an operation, we had a number of hours together, and I was talking to him about this very subject, and he was describing this being the horrible feeling of being in the Atlantic Ocean. They would convoy ships over. I don't know exactly what year this was, but as he described it to me, and how they had to hand off ships to the British to go toward Murmansk, Russia, over the North Sea and the North Atlantic, that they would see that the Germans were sinking these boats left and right, and they saw them going down. And I, as my father described it, of course, probably 50, 60 years later, I could just see his face just turn red, and he was reliving it again. And so that gives us a little bit of a hint, I think, sometimes how people, guys that have been in the war, sometimes don't want to talk about it. And then I'm going to read one more excerpt. There's many more that I could, but I see that we're getting long on time a little bit, and want to leave time for questions. I'm going to read this one. This again from my father's short autobiography, kind of giving context at the end of this book. Oh, before I do, I want to mention one other thing. I am so impressed with the quality of writing that my father did on this. I'm maybe a little biased, but He wrote this, and as you read it, I think you'll agree with me. He wrote it in quite a good way, and he wrote this with an eighth grade education. So it's amazing. I think most of us coming out of college might not have done any better than this. So the last excerpt here he's describing subs would wait outside the submarine nets at the entrances to harbors. As ships came out, they were sunk. So captains would use a quick position change to confuse the subs. It worked at Argentia, Newfoundland. This is a place where they had temporary harbor. We were coming out of the harbor, headed for Greenland, when the captain had ordered a hard right starboard turn. The port watch on the bridge saw a torpedo streak past our bow. Had the captain not ordered the turn at that exact second, we would have been torpedoed. In the early part of the war, subs even sunk ships when they were tied up by the docks. And then they used subnets to close the harbors. So, by the way, this editor is very grateful for that miss on that torpedo. I want to open it up for questions now, so I'll turn it back over to Eric.
Mark, thank you so much for presenting that to us today. You know, we get to hear a lot about World War II, and we hear a lot about, you know, Marines and Army in the Pacific, or the Army, you know, waging war across Europe, but we really don't get too many accounts of Coast Guard personnel, and particularly up around the area where your father was. So it's just a really unique perspective that you've given us today, in this war that we all study a lot and we look at. But like I said, you know, Coast Guard accounts are not something that we see very often here at the museum. So it was just really nice to have that perspective from your father today.
Thank you. Thank you.
I am going to bring up my questions here. Give me just a moment while I make this happen. Sorry, Mark, can you stop your screen sharing so I can bring mine up?
Okay.
Oh, never, I just, there we go. No problem. And I'll move up to the very first question here. There we go. I know I can't see anything because all my tiles are in the way. What made you decide to transcribe your father's journal into a book, Mark? What was the first kind of like inclination that you had that maybe this is a project that you want to undertake?
I guess just it came gradually, but I just felt like it was a story that though personal, had enough time in between it, and it was a story that needed to be told, both from a historical standpoint, but also kind of from a very personal standpoint. And as I talked with different historians, including one from the Coast Guard, they said there really wasn't anything like this. It was something that was written where we had the original. It was written during the time aboard ship and up in the Greenland patrol operation. So that kind of convinced me, and I did, since my parents were newlyweds. There were a couple small sections which I have kept out, but it's very small, and just for obviously for privacy reasons, and so that's what kind of all entered into the decision.
Let me bring my screen share back up here. Mark, question number two, what was the most surprising thing that you learned or discovered about your father while doing your research for this book and transcribing his journal?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. The most surprising thing, I guess, was that he was did such a good job of recording daily life, and that his, like I mentioned before, he was very good at expressing himself. And so I think for with an eighth grade education, and he was a little bit older than the average age. He was, I think, 23 when he wrote this. because he was born in 1919. I think that would have made him 23. And so yeah, it was impressive to me how he expressed himself.
Excellent. Third question here, Mark. Why did your father write his journal down on that roll of sonar paper as opposed to maybe like a notebook or something like that?
Yeah. Um, I think it was just available. It was discarded. He was the radio man, right? So he wasn't the sonar operator, but I think he probably knew the sonar operators, and they just I learned that it was discarded, and so he just kept it, and it was quite an ingenious thing. And actually, he did start a trend. There were other guys that I believe also did this. He may have, again, I can't remember. Sometimes I forget whether he mentioned this to me personally or whether it's in the account itself. But others were starting to do the same thing. I don't know. I don't know that there are any ones that got saved other than this one, though.
So your father, well, he was a trendsetter.
Yeah.
Well, so we talked a few seconds ago about maybe some of the surprising things that you found out about your father. What was the hardest part about writing this book?
You mean from I'm taking this hardest for me or hardest for him?
Hardest for you?
Okay. Yeah, because I was gonna say the hardest for him was keeping a steady hand and making this, can you imagine just pitching around and trying to roll the scroll and keep it, even and right. It was just, yeah, it was always square to the page. I couldn't believe it. The hardest for me was probably um, tr transcribing. It wasn't the hardest, actually. I used a voice recognition software, and so I spoke it all in, and then I had to, correct things that didn't get in there quite right. The software isn't perfect. And then I edited it. But the hardest thing I think for me was when I was actually when I was submitting it to Kindle for Amazon. So this book is available on Amazon. Also, by the way, at I might add, at the Wisconsin Veterans Museum gift shop. But the when I was entering the manuscript with Kindle, this is all an automated process, by the way. And so if any of you ever want to make your own book, I mean, it was the first time I did it. The irony of me doing this book is I live in a family where my wife is a much better writer than I am, and here I come out with a book, and my son Dan is a good writer, and my son Joe is a good writer, and so here I am, the one that came out with this, but it's all automated. So in one hand, I never talked to one person doing this. It's all online, and it's free. There's no money up front to actually write a manuscript. The most difficult part was, though, inserting the pictures and getting those formatted right. I did not have any experience with that, and I just learned as I went, and eventually got it right. And so that was the challenge for me.
And then Mark, how long did it take you to from the start of the project to the end of the project? How long was that process?
Yeah, I retired in 2014. I'm sorry, 2015, and so I had done a little bit of it before. Uh, in terms of we actually had to actually treat the original scroll because it had invisible mold spores on it. So we started reading it, and our eyes were just watering, and we are coughing and sneezing. So I had to treat it. So I talked to a preservationist about that, just to do it right, and I got that squared away so we can actually handle it and transcribe it all without having major problems breathing. So got that taken care of. That was early on. That was shortly after my dad passed away in 2002, living with us, and so and then there was a lot of time between then and when I retired in 2014 that I didn't do a lot on it. But then once I retired, so really for the last 9 years I've been working on it, and
Oh,
so just finish it up, and it published in January of this previous January.
so that took up a significant portion of time then. And it's a good thing you were retired. You had the time to devote to that.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't work on it 8 hours a day by any means, but yeah, I would do it as I had time and didn't want to rush it.
Mark, do you know of any other Coast Guard accounts from World War II like this one? As you were doing your research for the book, did you come across anything like
Uh,
that?
Yeah, there is one other one, but it's not exactly the same. It wasn't written at the time. It was written afterward, and I believe that's called Death Death in a Wooden Shoe or Death of a Wooden Shoe, something like that. And I'm forgetting the guy's name. I think the author's name was Novak. But again, that was written after the fact, and I think it was eventually published by I believe the University of Florida or something like that.
Okay. Mark, how did the Coast Guard, especially in your fathership and in your presentation, you talked about the German soldiers and their weather stations. How did the Coast Guard attack them? Did they have Marines assigned to them, or did the Coast Guard men themselves exit the ship and kind of assault these little shanties that they were building on all these uncharted fjords?
Yeah, they typically would come in to around the corner in a fjord where they knew a weather station was. And I think the largest gun that they had on board ship was like a 3-inch shell, which is, good size, but not huge. And they'd fire one over the top, it hit the side of the mountain above the shack, and the guys would invariably come out with their hands up. And we're just grateful that they didn't get killed and that they'd taken prisoner. Once in a while, they would do that, and there was nobody around. So somehow they found out ahead of time, had a German submarine or ship come and pick them up and got out of there just in time, ahead of time. So that can happen. In terms of landing parties, they would go in too, and yeah, they had Marines, I believe, aboard ship, and I think I have a picture of the guys that I believe were probably Marines. Somebody might be better expert than me on that. If you read the book and you look at it, you can see possibly and judge by the looks of it. But I think they did have Marines, and I think they also had the Coast Guard fellows themselves would also sometimes be on landing parties.
Okay. Dangerous mission for a Coast Guardman.
Yeah, I think it was more dangerous for the prisoners being next to him, sleeping right next to you. But yeah.
And then the next question kind of deals with the same topic of these Germans. Do you know where these German prisoners were sent once they were brought back to America?
No, I don't know where they were sent. I mean, they were, I believe, taken, back to the States and where they were actually housed, I'm not sure.
I mean, I know that there was some German POW camps here in Wisconsin. I know family member of mine was also on German prisoner guard duty in Colorado. So I know that they were spread out, throughout the United States. I just didn't know if there was a particular place where they were bringing these guys that your father's ship had captured. I don't know if they kept them around the Boston area or if they knew specifically where they were being sent to.
Yeah, I don't know that, but all I know is they were on board ship for quite a while, with these, because they were out for that long. I don't know at what point in their 9 month tour of duty that they were given to them, but that was uh, not a 1 or 2 day deal.
Sure. And that brings a question to mind just from my own end. Did your father in his journal, or do you talk about in the book anywhere what these Germans did on the ship? I'm sure they put them to work somehow. Oh no, Mark,
I I think you're frozen up there.
is it me?
I
Great.
can't hear you.
Oh, okay, there we go. We're back. Can you hear me now?
There we go. Yep.
Okay. No, I was just curious if your father discussed in his journal, or if you talk about anywhere in the book, what these Germans did while they were on the ship. I'm sure they must have put them to work in some shape or form. They didn't just weren't allowed to sit around all day. Phooey. Ah, technology issues abound at the Wisconsin Veterans Museum. I do apologize if anybody can hear me. Um, well, shoot.
You're good now.
Did you get a chance to hear my question at all, Mark? Oh, okay. So everybody's telling me they're coming through on the chat. They're saying you're frozen. It's not on my end, which is news to me because it usually is on my end.
Yeah.
Okay, Mark. Well, listen, where can we pick up a copy of this book? Where would you suggest we go to learn more about your
Message
father's?
earlier.
Where can we pick up a copy of this book, Mark?
You can pick it up with Amazon and with the gift shop right there at the Wisconsin Veterans Museum. And by the way, if you want to get a signed copy, leave your information with the museum, or and I'd be happy to invite you to my Middleton facility, otherwise known as my house, and we'll sit down and have a talk, and I'll sign a copy for you. But most people are getting it either at Amazon under that title, or at the gift shop at the Veterans Museum. Again, the title "My Book to You" from the Greenland Patrol. By the way, I should say, if we can still have time here,
Sure.
that title came uh, right late in the scroll where my father was writing to my mother, and he counted up the approximate number of words and lines. And he says, "I never thought I would write a book, but I think I'll call it My Book to You." So that's why I used that as the title.
Well, Mark, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing this story about your father. And just good luck with your book sales. I know you're not in this to make a fortune or become this famous American author. But still, we do wish you the best of luck. And if you ever are here at the museum, please stop in and say hello. We'd love to meet you in person since you're just right down the road. As I mentioned earlier, this is not our last book talk of 2024. We do have one more coming up on December 9th, and that is going to be with Mark Van Els. And he's going to be talking about his latest work, which I'll hold up right here, History of the Red Arrow Across the Pacific. So it's the 32nd Infantry Division in World War II. And like I said, that will be on December 9th. So if you are interested, please look for registration links on our website, wisvetsmuseum.com/events. I hope everybody has a fantastic Veterans Day. Enjoy the wonderful weather while it lasts if you are here in Madison. And we will see everybody again very soon.